The moment the shots were fired, the target, which imagine a white Post-it note sized piece of paper with a red bullseye on it, flew off his chest about halfway across the room. It looked like it landed somewhere behind the electric chair.
I think having a video record of it that can be reviewed if there's ever a problem, and also I would think it would help just to figure out something new like the firing squad. Are you doing this the best way possible?
Record an execution? In a world where the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and even high school games have instant replay, the state can execute someone and the public has to rely on reporters' eyes only. I'm Anne Emerson, an investigative reporter with more than 30 years in the field, and I've watched an execution. And today we're going to talk about what it's like to witness what happens in the death chamber and why someone would want to see a killer die. Hit like, tap subscribe, and turn on your notifications because I don't want you to miss any of our true crime deep dives. I'm joined by AP reporter Jeffrey Collins, who has witnessed 14 executions, including 3 by firing squad just this year.
Capital punishment sentence for Steven Bryant was carried out tonight pursuant to the order of the South Carolina Supreme Court and in accordance with state law. He was sentenced to death for murdering Tietjen, whom he shot 9 times, burned his face and eyes with a cigarette, and wrote, "Catch me if you can," on the wall in the victim's blood.
Jeffrey didn't just witness this execution. He's covered this case since day one.
Yeah, my hair's gray, so I can tell you, I have actually covered Steven Bryant from the start to the end. I was out on the dirt roads in Sumter. I was out on the dirt roads in Sumter County when they were looking for him. In fact, when I was driving around down the dirt, you drive down dirt roads looking for, well, where did all this stuff happen in, so you can get your picture in your mind of it. And I suddenly see an SUV with blue lights behind me, and so I sit there. Well, okay, well, that's fine. It happens sometimes when you're out and about. They want to know what you're doing out there. It was the sheriff of Sumter County at the time, Tommy Mims. He said, "What the hell are you doing out here?" And I talked to him. We were fine. But yeah, so Steven Bryant was in Sumter County, and for whatever reason, his lawyers say what happened was he started to have some PTSD and think a lot about some sexual abuse he had suffered as a child. And he went to go ask for help for that, but they couldn't do it unless he had $75, and he just didn't have $75 to go pay to go see a therapist and start that process. So they say that kind of caused him to break, maybe that. And also he did some drugs, apparently smoked joints that he sprayed with bug spray. So yeah, those combination of those two things. And for whatever reason, he goes and he robs a house and he steals a gun. And then he goes to the boat ramp, which if you've ever driven from Columbia to Sumter, there's the bridge that goes over the Congaree River, I think it is.
Okay,
but it's
yeah.
a long bridge. He goes to the boat ramp there, shoots a guy in the back, thought he killed him, but the guy managed to drive himself 18 miles to the ER in Sumter. That's an amazing story in of itself after, almost dead. And then after that, he has a friend of his that he's driving around in a truck, and they stop, and the friend gets out to urinate, to relieve himself on the side of the road, shoots the guy in the back, leaves him for dead, drives off, the guy dies. Then he goes to that guy's house and burglarizes it and burns it down. So a day or two later, he's already sort of cased out the Tietjen place, TJ Tietjen, the victim that he was put to death for. And this is the one that was really off. And he goes in there and he says, gives him some kind of story about his car being broken or needs some help. And so at some point, after spending a little time in there, he shoots Tietjen, I think 9 times or close to it, several times, certainly. And at that point, he also puts cigarettes out in Tietjen's eyes. He, scrawls on the wall, "Catch me if you can," in Tietjen's blood. He, when he spends an hour or two in there, and we get towards the end of the day, and the victim's wife and daughter are calling him because they hadn't heard from him in several hours, and he lets it ring a couple of times. But then at some point, he picks up the phone when each one of them call separately, and he picks up the phone for each one of them, says, "I'm the prowler. Where's TJ? Well, he's dead." And so taunts him that way. And so then by that point, that got out there, all that stuff I just told you, the blood and all that stuff. So suddenly Sumter County is in an uproar. I mean, he's terrorizing him at that point, and he's still on the loose. So there's a couple of days of terror in Sumter County where during those 2 days, the third person he killed was somebody he met at a convenience store, and he did the same kind of thing, drove around dirt roads. Guy got out to relieve himself, shot him in the back. It wasn't long after that when he got arrested. So it was 8 days total, 5 days, 3 killings. It was a pretty rough stretch there in Sumter County.
So it was this is like a what we would define as like a spree killing, right? Was this like a spree killing? Am I right about that?
Yeah, exactly. And we, beyond what I told you about like the mental breakdown, we never really quite understood, because he had a few convictions, but nothing incredibly violent beforehand. And he did attack a corrections officer while he was waiting his sentencing. So there was a little bit of violence afterwards, but no, it's just this one 5 day, 8 day, depending on how you want to look at it, thing where, yeah, all this happened and just awful.
Well, it was so bizarre that it did really make headlines. Like when you hear that he wrote "Catch Me If You Can" sprawled in like, the victim's blood. I mean, it was like out of a horror movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I remember sitting around and when I first heard about that, I was like, okay, that's I mean, like, again, 25 years in South Carolina, I've seen, some pretty awful things, and that's towards the top of the list as far as your everything, right? Your news judgment going off, and your what is that going off, and everything. So yeah, I mean, it's and even among death row, it's a very I mean, there's a couple more of those. I think they each have their own horrific story, but that's towards the top.
And this was back in the early 2000s, early like 2000, what was it? 2004, 2008?
October 2004 was the crime, and '08 was the sentencing.
So he was young
Yeah, I want to say he was. Let's see, he was 44 when he died.
on
So he was
Friday.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah. So he would have been 22, 23, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, death row inmates, I always think of them as slightly older than that. I guess we've had some variation recently because it's really sped up, but I've always thought maybe it's because there was such a long lapse and when they decided to move forward with it. But when they convicted him and gave him the death penalty, of course, firing squad wasn't on the list, was it?
No, in fact, then it would have been just electric chair or lethal.
Were you surprised when the firing squad became legal in South Carolina?
I can remember, when they, okay, so we're in this pause. We don't have the lethal injection drugs. Lawmakers are getting nervous that we can't execute inmates. I remember the first time this popped up, it was a freshman Republican House member who, to my memory, I couldn't tell you his name, like, because like he came and went, right? It was very, and he made that suggestion, and I talked to him a little bit, and I'm just like totally dismissed it. I mean, the firing squad is in a way a relic, but it then Dick Harpootlian, our old friend Dick Harpootlian, brought it back up, and
Yep.
that was the kicker right there. I mean, once you got somebody with his gravitas,
we're not here to exact vengeance. We're not here to inflict pain. We're here to carry out the sentence, which is death. And it seems to me that is the least barbaric way to do it.
Then you also got former solicitor Greg Embry in Horry County also backing it.
We've been unable to carry out the law as determined by judges and juries throughout the state for a 10-year period. It found that was technically the most humane, most certain and humane method of death that we have in America, and that quite frankly, I was a little bit surprised. I mean, you just don't know till you start digging into this.
Once you got those two people that have the experience and that, like I said, the gravitas, is an idea that caught wind. And I mean, if you look around the country, it's something that's catching up too. A colleague of mine, when we were first discussing this firing squad thing, was like, well, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes in South Carolina, because if it's not horrific or people aren't completely like disgusted by it, bullets are a lot cheaper than trying to obtain these lethal injection drugs. So that's the thing I'm looking at to see. I mean, North Carolina is starting to think about restarting its death penalty. It wouldn't surprise me if they figure out if there's at least a pretty healthy debate, pretty strong debate over whether or not to include a firing squad. Idaho's the most interesting one. Idaho's looking at it, and one of the things they're looking at is, instead of having volunteers pull the trigger, they're looking at having one person who would sit in a room and press a button, and it would fire 3 or 5 guns simultaneously. So it's almost like a drone strike, right? Like they're just hitting the button and the guns fire themselves. So there's a lot of debate over the firing squad that's been, I wasn't quite expecting, but I can see why it's started to develop.
Well, and that's been one of the argument from the anti-death penalty. We talked to a gentleman who was on the anti-death penalty front, and this was a little whiles ago, but he was talking about how death, carrying out an execution is honestly a lot more expensive than just leaving them in prison.
The truth is that when a prosecutor decides that he or she is going to seek a death sentence, they're decided to spend at least twice as much money just on the trial. Half of all death sentences are overturned during the appeals process. That's not the conviction, that's the sentence. And then we get to go back and do that sentencing process over again. More money. Okay, so if money is your concern, we're spending a lot less when we're not seeking a death penalty.
Much more expensive. I mean, you have appeals. I mean, like Steven Bryant, we talked about it. He was about as quick as you can do. 21 years is a pretty quick process and actually, if you do from 2008 when he was convicted, you're looking at 17. But he had at least 4 different layers of appeals, and all but the last one were like years worth of like reviewing transcripts and hearings and all of this stuff, and that costs money. And I mean, it costs money just to hold people on death row because you're holding them in a different way than they have their own cells, they have their own, so they're not being held in a general population. So even that's a little more expensive. So yeah, each death penalty case, I forget the exact figures, but it's several times more than it does if you just put them in general population for life.
So the firing squad comes around. I mean, Dick Harpootlian, that's a whole story in itself. Like before the whole Pee Wee Gaskins story came, I mean, of course we knew his role in that, but before his book came out, I remember talking to him about Pee Wee Gaskin as one of his reasons.
When Pee Wee was executed in the electric chair, his eyes exploded, his hair caught on fire. Was basically tortured to death. It took a while for him to die. I thought that was horrendous. And now, for a number of years, you had the choice between lethal injection and the electric chair. And, lethal injection, I think, is far less barbaric way to kill somebody. But then we couldn't get the drugs. So it was just the electric chair. I read a bunch on the firing squad. Justice Sotomayor had a opinion. She opined that it was a much more humane method to kill somebody. So that's why I put the rather than just the electric chair, give the condemned the option to go with the fire shot, and some have actually chosen it. So
he also said, if we're going to do the death penalty, we need to do it with something that would be quicker and less painful, I think was the argument on the firing squad.
In doing research, I found that Utah has been using the firing squad for a long time. And the anecdotal reports that you read indicated it's instantaneous, no lingering, no suffering, instantaneous death.
What do you think?
The experts that testify in favor of the firing squad say if it's done properly and the heart's hit by these bullets that fragment, then, the heart's basically destroyed. And when the heart's destroyed, blood stops flowing very quickly. Death happens very quickly. It runs into the same thing that's interesting in all death penalty arguments, right? No one comes back from this and tells us that really hurt or that didn't hurt. I mean, they don't come back. So we're all just kind of in a little bit of the dark here, no matter how much science we have in our favor or how we look at it. But, it is, and the other point that the corrections department is very careful about is it is a gross and disfiguring thing, but they dress the inmate in all black. They had the angle that we're at is we're not looking directly at the inmate. We're looking at him from a direction like this. And so, I've tried 2 of the 3 seats I can sit in, and you don't see a whole lot of blood. You might see a little bit of the shirt getting wet or something, but it's not an incredibly gruesome scene that happens in front of you.
You could start to see a sort of a spreading kind of pool of wetness across his chest. They're wearing black, so you couldn't, it's obviously blood. You can't see necessarily that it's blood.
Like I said, what's happening. So, but it's not like some awful disfigurement happens.
Yeah, you don't see the blood because talk to me, Jeffrey, about what you see let's talk about the firing squad, because of course it's different for every case. It was different from the lethal injection one that I saw, but talk to me about the firing squad, what they actually put Steven Bryant in.
So the curtain opens, and when the curtain opens, the inmate's already in the firing squad chair. And again, like I said, the bullets come from my right to my left. So I'm looking at an angle at him, so I don't see him front on. So to look at us, you have to look a little bit. And everything's strapped down. Your legs are strapped down. His arms are strapped down. There's a straps across his chest. His head is in a strap. He can kind of move it just a tiny bit, but the goal is to have the least amount of movement possible, because the other thing they've done before the curtain opens is they set the target over the heart. So a doctor's come in there, determine where the inmate's heart is, and place it's a target with a red bullseye on it over their heart, and they want as little movement possible at that point because they don't want the heart to move around. So and like I said, it looks like it's a square about the size of maybe a Post-it note, and there's a red circle, and then there's a broader red circle. I mean, it is a bullseye. And so the lawyer reads the inmate's final words, if that's what they choose to do. Bryant didn't have a statement, some do. And then what happens after that is the warden comes out, pulls out a hood. They put a hood over the inmate's head. So, and then the same warden walks over, and there's like a pull shade like you would have in your house. It's black. They pull that pull shade up, and there's 3 little squares, and that's where the gunmen are, or the shooters. And you can't see the guns. You don't hear any kind of countdown. There's not a 3, 2, 1 fire. There's no lights that I can tell from my view that indicate it's time to fire. And it's usually the first one was a little longer. The second and third one, it's about 45, maybe 55 seconds from the time the hood gets placed or the shade gets pulled to the time the shots fire. And so it's interesting because that's you talk about anxiety. That is a lot of energy, nervous energy. I mean, just all over the place, because in 2 of the cases, the inmates were breathing very, very heavy. I can't, because I can't imagine, right? And you don't know when it's going to happen. And I tell people this too, you're going to flinch because you don't know when it's going to happen. Everybody that I've seen in each one of these have flinched. There was a couple of gasps on the first one too, because then when it happens, it's a very loud noise, like maybe a metal door slamming. You see something happen to the target. It's different on each one. One of them, it got pushed in. The most recent one in Bryant, it got blown across the room. Like you saw it fly off and head off of probably a good 5 or 6 feet in front of him. So, and then at that point, you're just kind of, like I said, in Mikhail Ahmadi's case, you were hearing groans and everything. That was its own thing. The other 2, you just kind of saw someone take a couple of breaths, and then maybe one last kind of gasp, and then that's it. The doctor comes in. And in a firing squad, lethal injection can take 20 minutes at least. The firing squad execution, it starts at 6:01, it ends at 6:05. It's very quick.
Well, I was just thinking, because we were talking about what he was actually wearing. He actually even has on mittens, and I would assume those mittens are so that if any blood is seeping down his body, we would not. It's to spare everybody else, really, right?
Yeah, I think that everything that they do, and I mean, like it's on it. The chair is in a basin. Like it's on like a little tub almost, but it's a little shallow tub. But if you look very closely, the floor of it is tilted just a little. So whatever happens goes down and back, and you wouldn't even be able to visually see it for very long in that direction either. And I mean, hate to be like this, but it probably makes it easier to clean everything up at the end too. But I mean, so it's all set up so you don't see like this.
Yeah, it's as sterilized for the audience as possible, besides the actual, like, you hear it, it's happening, you may hear the inmate, but it is, I guess, kind of sterilized to some degree.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also,
you don't see the guns. You don't see the guns. You don't even see what's shooting them.
No, you don't see all. Like I said, they're just sitting there, and all of a sudden you hear this blam, and typically you see something like I said, in this most recent one, the target went flying off, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I'd like to see what the target looks like, but you can't stand up, not like I can stand up and look or anything like that. And then once the doctor is done, and as soon as the doctor's done and gives his little nod to the warden says the sentence was carried out at 6:05, curtains closed. And by that point, I can't stand up and see where the target is or anything. So, I mean, like that's what the United States has wanted with the death penalty is to make it as sanitized as possible. I mean, there's a reason we don't broadcast these things. There's a reason there's no filming of this, even just internally, right? There's like if they wanted to go back and see if it appeared all 3 bullets hit Mikhail Mahdi. They can't because there's no video taken or anything of this.
The that really, and how do you feel about getting brought in there? Because Jeffrey, you really do take down every single detail of these. And how do you feel about not even being able to see him enter the room, or what happens right after an execution? There are these critical moments of the inmate coming in. With lethal injection, it was that he was getting the IVs. With this, it was getting strapped down and put into place. How do you feel about not being part of that process?
That bugs me because like I'll use lethal injection as the first example. There are 2 ways a lethal injection goes wrong. 1, the drugs aren't right. 2, the IV isn't placed right. We don't watch the IV get put in, so I can't tell you what happens during that process. Can't tell you whether it took an hour, if it because there's probably some level. You can make some argument there's some level of discomfort if it takes them or if they have to even in some states where they've had to do a cut down where they actually cut into the tissue. We're not told anything like that. So that bugs me. And in a lethal injection, if you think about it, there's only a couple of ways that it goes wrong. But one key thing is if they didn't place the target over the heart right. I mean, you could hit the target, but if the target's not in the right place, that's how that can go wrong. And so that other states, even if the media doesn't get to witness that, the defense lawyer gets to witness that, or somebody gets to see that. And I think it's I'm a sunlight kind of guy. I think it's important that as much of this process is seen as possible by people who don't have a stake in it. I talked about the videotaping of it. Personally, I don't want these things broadcast publicly. I think that's not what I want here. But I think by taping these things and putting them under seal where only a judge has it and can put it out there if necessary to be reviewed. I mean, then, in the society we live in, I think that's important. And it's especially important in the lethal injection because, again, my angles are off. I don't get to see how important would it be to be able to see the inmate from a front view and see what happens there if there was a problem. Again, not saying you should broadcast it, but I think having a video record of it that can be reviewed if there's ever a problem. And also, I would think it would help just to figure out something new like the firing squad. Are you doing this the best way possible?
Jeffrey, you couldn't be more right about that, in my opinion, because there's nothing more objective than a taping of what you're looking at. Because, I remember being in the room and it got a little hectic having to look at the clock and then looking at at the inmate, and you're looking back and you're looking this way, you're missing things. You're always going to miss things because that's just the nature of the thing. And I can see why a playback would be incredibly important when there are questions. I mean, we're still killing somebody, and we need to understand what happened.
Well, it just unfolds, like you say, it unfolds so quickly. I mean, your eyes need to be 5 different places. Even now, I've seen 3 of them, so I kind of know what to expect. But I'm at the point now where I've made a decision. I'm going to look at the inmate when the shots get fired. I'd be curious to see if you could see the guns or see anything that happens in that back room. But I'm not going to stare at that part of it because I missed this part of it. And yeah, but if you had this thing, and like I said, it's an open thing, right? It's an accountability issue, basically, is how I kind of see it.
Jeffrey, when you heard that the way they were going to set up this execution with the firing squad with these volunteers, I mean, we saw problem. I don't know if there were problems, but whatever happened in the last one where he was groaning and they have questions about how many shots actually hit, there's been a lot of controversy about that.
Immediately when that shot hit Mr. Mahdi, he let out it was almost like a yell, just a holler, and he breathed a couple of deep breaths. His chest rose and fell. Then the second set of moans that were a little quieter, maybe took about 2 seconds. And then he let out a last deep guttural type of moan. It was very low. And that was followed immediately by what appeared to be his final breath.
Is there room for improvement here?
And here's the kicker, that the thing that was frustrating with the Mahdi one is, so I told you the autopsy was going to be key, right? they didn't do a very good autopsy. It wasn't done very thoroughly at all. They had like 2 or 3 photos at the most. They didn't have like what would you think? Like immediately, the first thing you think of is they would follow the bullet's path through the body. So they'd be able to figure out how many bullets, where'd they go. They didn't do that. They only looked at the front and the back, and they did a little bit of look into they were like, okay, the bullets did, at least the bottom part of the heart was damaged. But they didn't do like what you would think you'd have, like dozens of photographs. And like I said, a diagram of bullet paths, and, each individual bullet, like set aside and made sure that they tested all that kind of stuff. You'd think that all of these things would have been done, and that was a problem, not just for us to figure out. I tell the corrections department, it's a problem for them too, because if they had the evidence, they're saying that there was only 2 bullet holes in the front of Mikhail Mahdi.
Because Mikhail was not shot directly in the heart, the amount of time that he was conscious and was consciously experiencing that excruciating pain was longer than if he was shot directly in the heart.
The point that the corrections department makes is actually there were still 3 bullets hit. We didn't find a bullet in the death chamber, so it didn't miss. Just 2 bullets went in the same place. Okay, well, if you had that thorough autopsy, then you could have pointed out that there were 3 different paths through his body. So yeah, okay, I get your point. So he can't prove anything. So, I think there is always room for improvement in these things. And I think part of that is to make sure that things get documented as thoroughly as possible. And then that way we can all make our own judgments because we have as much information in front of us as we can get.
I want to ask you too, Jeffrey, what is the total number of executions you witnessed?
This, after the one Friday night, it's 14, 10 lethal injections, 3 firing squads, the 3 that they've done in the past 12 months, and 1 electric chair, which was about 20 years ago. The AP by law has a slot as the dominant wire service, and it came to a point where I was like, well, if I go consistently, I can see each one of these and be able to compare it to the last one.
That has got to be one of the most executions for reporters out there. Have you ever asked sort of gently, have I seen the most executions? Am I the one?
We had a correspondent in Texas, and Texas is a big death penalty state who's probably seen into the hundreds. If you get past that, and his reasoning was almost the same as mine, is let me be able to compare all these. If you get past that, yeah, I've got colleagues. My colleague in Alabama has seen about as many as I have. My colleague in Georgia's around that. I mean, so we all kind of had this same thought in our head at the same time, was let's see these. And in Alabama, maybe I even think it's especially important. Kim Chandler there, they had the nitrogen execution, and she is the only one. Well, I think Louisiana may be picking that up soon, but she's the only one that sees that. So she wants to make sure she sees every one. And it's been a interesting arc for that, because that is that's a different method than any other one that we see out there.
When you say different, you mean how?
Well, so the nitrogen execution is they put a mask over the inmate, almost like a sleep apnea mask, so it covers their nose and their mouth, and they pump nitrogen into the mask, so the inmate's breathing nitrogen instead of oxygen, and eventually that replaces oxygen, and the inmate dies. When they originally suggested this, they said it would happen very quickly, but in each execution, it seems like it takes a little longer for this to happen. I mean, Kim does some very good reporting, watching it, and they struggle. They look like they're strapped down, but it looks like they're trying to reach out and trying to pull the mask off or do something. So I think it's important in cases like that we have somebody there that can say, well, what did this one look like compared to the first one, and that kind of thing.
Jeffrey, as far as going into this, a lot of people have asked me why I'd want to see an execution, and it's not really, I said for me personally, it was my job. First of all, it's mandated by state, and they need someone to be there. And the way I've thought about it in my head is, I don't want this to happen in the dark. I feel like if the state's going to kill somebody, then I feel very strongly that someone needs to be present to be able to document it and see it from what I would hope is, if not neutral, an objective standpoint. Does that ring true to you, or is yours on a different plane? Why do you do it? Why do you say, yes, of course I'll go? Because of course they could figure it out like otherwise, right? They have to.
And I'm there. I'm with you. I would back up one step and just say, I tell colleagues all the time, not just AP colleagues, but anyone, I get phone calls when executions are scheduled from reporters that are like, what's this like? Can you tell me about it? And I tell them the same thing. You don't have to cover this. I mean, don't feel like you're not a good reporter if you don't want to cover this. There's some things that I think mentally and whatever, I had a colleague who covered an execution, and then the next one came around and she'd had a child between the two of them, and she no more. And I can understand that. At that whatever point, she did, or her mentality had changed a little bit. But for me, I'm with you on that. I think it's important. There are 10 witnesses in the room for any regular execution in South Carolina, roughly. So there's the attorney and his spiritual advisor for the inmate. There's several family members and a couple of law enforcement. So I know they're witnesses, but they're looking at it from their own perspectives, right? The sheriff that prosecuted that investigated the case is going to have his own thoughts on this. Family obviously is going to have their own thoughts on this of the victim. The defense attorney is obviously going to have his own thoughts. But I go in there as somebody who's just looking at what happens. I try to be as factual as I can in that. I try not, I always tell people, don't get in front of your skis. Like I said, when I heard those groans from Mikhail Mahdi, I'm like, wait a second, I can't say he was feeling pain or it was botched or something, because I'm going to need more evidence than that. So I needed the autopsy report to be able to tell me what really happened. So I didn't go out there that day at the news conference afterwards and say, oh, this thing was wrong. It didn't work out the way it was supposed to. I needed evidence to be able to back that up, and that's an autopsy. But yeah, ultimately, the role is the state of South Carolina allows people to be executed by we the people allow this to happen, right? It's through our elected representatives. So I'm their eyes in there. I'm the one person that doesn't have a stake in it that can see it with the other two media witnesses also, and tell people what happened so they can come up with their own judgments on whether this is something we want to do as a state or not.
And, the other half of that is, okay, so now you've made this commitment, as I did once. I've only been to one, a lethal injection, but you make this commitment to go and to be present at it. How do you prepare yourself to get to that room? And afterwards is a different question, but how do you prepare yourself to just mentally get there?
I think it's, in a way, and you may remember this, in a way, it's helpful that I've been there before, right? Because when you do it the first time, and the first time I did the firing squad was a very, for me personally, just anxious time, because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I was going to see. It's all brand new. So part of that is I know what's going to happen. And part of the preparation is, I look the case up. I try to reach out to the families. I try to reach out to anybody I think that might be witnessing this. Part of it in my own heart is I reach out to these people once and I say, look, I'm Jeffrey Collins, the Associated Press. I've seen a dozen of these. I know you sound like you might be a witness, or you are going to be a witness. You want to talk to me about it. Do it off the record. I can lend you my experience, and that way you can see what you're going to expect. So that helps me in a way, because then I know who's going to be in the room, and I know if there's going to be any other things outside of the execution itself that I need to pay attention to. And part of it is, it's just almost like a mind clearing exercise. It's good that you have those two other media witnesses, as when you're waiting to go back there, you're able to talk to somebody, and it's not like an intolerable wait.
It's kind of intolerable, Jeffrey. Can I just say that? That was that was probably my hardest part. We're just sitting there in Christy's office, who's, she's the sweetest thing. She runs this SCDC press office, and it wasn't intolerable. But do you know what I mean? It was just everything, you have to put your stuff in a plastic bag, and then you got to do all these little things. So it wasn't impossible, but it was definitely the hardest part for me, I think.
And if you notice, as my chitter chatter and everything starts to ramp down as we get closer and closer, because when by the time we get there, you remember the drive from the car from where you get searched to where you're sitting outside the death chamber. I talk a little bit, but not a whole lot, because by that point it's a mental, okay, I've got to know what I'm doing, prepare myself for what I'm going to see. And also, like I said, prepare myself for what I might see from elsewhere. The Steven Stanko one, again, the reason why I say I reach out to people and try to talk to them is the Steven Stanko the teenage daughter of the woman that he killed was a witness. She's a prosecutor now in Georgia. And so that's part of it too, because I have to say, okay, there may be an interaction here that may knock me off course a little bit, because like there was another one from 20 years ago where the mother of the inmate, who was a staunch anti-death penalty person, and I knew from that, was in the room that day, and they interacted as much as you can through that thick glass, and
Wow.
so I had to steel myself for that, because I'm watching a mother watch her son die. It was like, of everything else going on there, that's like, you got to process that too and let people know what that looks like. So I think preparation is kind of key to it, just so you have your mind in the right spot and you are able to do that 20 or firing squad 5 minutes, lethal injection 20 minutes worth of observation you need to do.
The victim's family came to this one, right? So we had can you talk to me just briefly about that?
It was again, I don't know 100% certainty who came. They don't tell us the names, and I try not to assume if I don't know, so.
And we're not, and you're not allowed to really interact with them in
Right.
there or after there, just etiquette, protocol, people kind of hurting us in certain directions. That's just not what's going on.
Well, and as a reporter, I try to reach out to those families beforehand.
Right.
But I've learned a long time ago, you reach out once, maybe twice, depending on what the method is and how certain you are that you have the right person. If I'm certain I have the right person, I only do it once. If I'm not, maybe I'll do it a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. But if a family says, I respect that. There has to be some point where you're like, okay, I understand where you're at right now. And so there was, an older person was in there. There was one that was about my age, maybe a little older, and there was another younger man in there. They all three held hands. That was the thing that struck me, is they all three kind of grabbed each other's hands as it was becoming obvious it was about to happen. And other than that, they flinched like we all do when the shots were fired, but they just watched. And usually those family members, their gaze does not leave. They're always looking at the inmate right there. Occasionally maybe in a lethal injection, because it takes so long, they start to look away at some point, because it's hard to keep your concentration on something for 20 minutes. But they looked straight at him, and that was that. And they got up and they left without having a lot of emotions being shown either. At times I've seen the victim's family cry a little bit as they get up to leave. At times I've seen a couple of them that look like I don't want to say angry, but you look like when you've seen something that happens that you wanted to see happen. It's all kinds of different reactions. I think we're all human beings, so we all have our own ways of responding to whatever this is.
And when you walk away from these, Jeffrey, you said something very kind to me. I remember you were like, here's my, you made sure that I had your cell phone number and that I could reach out to you, because the after effect of this for anyone, you are witnessing a death. And no matter, I bet you've seen it over a dozen times now, but it doesn't let go of you. I would say that you can compartmentalize it, but it doesn't necessarily let go of you completely. That's my way of describing it. How would you say it?
Well, it shouldn't go away from you. You're watching someone die. It's, and the government only gets to do this in a few rare circumstances. War, a police officer can shoot somebody and take their life if there's a risk, right? This is the only place really where it's planned. And I think you have to keep in mind that, like I said, there's a human being and there's a tragedy that gets built on top of this tragedy, right? Because there's the tragedy that happened that got that inmate there. That inmate's death is a tragedy in and of itself to somebody, right? He has a family. There's a community of people on death row that have to deal with a loss. And it's, I'm not trying to, it's an apples and oranges comparison in a way, but still it's a human being and it's a life. And I think once we start discounting that, then that's not good for our society overall. I think balanced on the other side, that's the decision that we've made, is that's what we should do. And that's how some crimes should be punished. And I get that too. But I think that you do have to, that's why that's such a big deal, is because it is a life. And, again, I can't, the other side of this is that's what happens. Like the state does this. So for me, I don't have to watch it, but to me, I need to watch it or I should watch it because I need to make sure that this happens the way it's supposed to happen and everything. So, it does. I'm very careful to not become so cynical or off that I don't see what's happening in front of me and don't realize the importance and the gravity of what's happening in front of me. But that same side is, this is something that's legally allowed by the state of South Carolina, so it's going to happen.
Well, we're lucky to have you, Jeffrey, because it's not an easy thing to go through, but you do it with grace, and you write very well about it. And I think you are asking the questions that we all want to know. From when it doesn't go as planned, when the target flies off. It's great to know that honestly that you can be there and be our witness, because just to understand what's going on, whether or not you agree with the death penalty or not, doesn't matter. It's more about whether or not it's happening the way we mandated it.
Well, it's been interesting over the last 14 or 15 months as I've shown up in court papers more than I ever thought I would, and for both sides. So that tells me something's going on, right? Because I'm like the Switzerland of this thing, I guess. I'm telling people when they look at my viewpoint as being as much down the middle. So yeah, it's been an interesting 14 months. I am glad, South Carolina's down to 22 people on its death row. There's one guy that's in California that's also on our death row, but there's just 22 in South Carolina. And that's after, it looks like we might have 2 or 3 executions in the next year or two, maybe. There's some people that are getting close, but yeah, it looks like we're going to slow down a little bit.
The fascination isn't slowing down, though, with the death penalty. Like, we have a lot of questions. I think the lethal injection is probably going to get in front of the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court as well. But if anybody chooses it again, or is it the lethal injection, or is it is the electric chair?
Yeah, that's right now,
All
the
right,
way
yeah. So the electric chair's got a lot of questions around it.
Yeah, the way the death penalty law is written right now is if you don't make a choice, inmate gets to make a choice 14 days before lethal injection, firing squad, or electric chair. If you don't make a choice, you default to the electric chair. And while the firing squad's gotten some debate and the lethal injection has been debated forever on whether or not it's cruel, unusual, and that, we haven't had an electric chair debate in the legal community in a while. And so the thought process is, well, somebody may choose the electric chair or default to the electric chair. Then they say, hey, this is cruel and unusual. That gets sorted out. Okay, so say the Supreme Court says, okay, it is cruel and unusual. Well, that backs the whole death penalty out, because each person that comes up to be executed will be like, I'm not choosing. Okay, you get the method that's unconstitutional. Okay, it can't happen. Well, but the other problem with that, though, is that inmate ends up in the electric chair if that doesn't work. And, among inmates and defense attorneys, there's some debate whether the lethal injection or firing squad, which one's less awful. But the electric chair, there's that goes above both of those. The electric chair is by any means not the I won't say the best way to go, but it's definitely got problems the other two don't have.
Yeah, it's also 100 years old or whatever. I mean, it's this ancient relic of, I asked about it, I feel like pretty recently, and they're like, well, we keep it up to speed, we make sure it's still working. It's like, oh my God.
They tell us each before they have to the corrections department has to issue an affidavit saying that they've tested all 3 methods, and they tell us they test the electric chair each time. But I've said, well, how do you test it? And that's under our protocols, that's under our shield law. So I don't know exactly how they test it. I'm sure there's some test, and places have electric chairs that they have probably some protocol in place, but you obviously can't test it the way that you would use it. You know what I'm saying? It's important to know that, and people talk about, well, did this get botched or did it work out? Well, we have all these questions that surround it. Important to remember that nobody, me, the corrections department, the inmate, the lawyers, nobody wants these things not to work. If you're going to get to the point where it's going to happen, then you want it to happen in the way it's supposed to happen. So I think it's important to know that this isn't, as long as we are going to have this process as people with citizens of South Carolina, then it's in everybody's best interest that it happens properly and right. And so that's why I'm there. That's why they have me there. That's why, other media witnesses are there. That's why the corrections department has this long list of things that they do. So I think it's important to know that part of it, that it is a very carefully meted out punishment. But, there's still a larger debate out there on whether or not we should be doing it, but that's a whole different debate than how it's done.
Drop a comment below and join in the conversation. I want to hear what you think about executions in America, especially the firing squad. And tomorrow, we're going to have an exclusive update in the Melody Buzzard case. That's the 9-year-old who's been missing out of California for more than a month. Be sure to tune in.